Mr. Vilders, thank you very much for joining us. You require quite an entourage when you travel. I have just walked through the security detail, and it seems that you're really under 24-hour protection wherever you go, and your mere presence in a city or town seems to ignite protests and in some cases violence. What is it like to be you in the centre of all that?
Well, when it comes to the security part, it is everything but nice. I've lived like this already now for almost 9 years because people want to kill me, because I'm critical about Islam. People believe that you should be killed, you should be beheaded, and more terrible things could happen to you. My wife and I, we lived in the last 9 years in prison cells, in army barracks. I had to wear wigs and fake mustaches just to be safe from assassins. And this is something, I have to be honest, that you don't wish your worst enemy to have. On the other hand, it proves that what I'm saying, my political message, is really something that should be said. I'm sure that if I would have been critical and wrote books or made movies or was a politician that was critical about Christianity, all those things would not have happened. It happens not only to me, Geert Wilders, but it happens to any person in the world who dares to be critical about Islam. Whether
you can't imagine though that if you toured the world, criticising Christianity as expressed in the Bible, that you wouldn't be subject to death threats, for example, in the United States.
No, that would certainly not have happened. People wrote books, made movies about Christianity. I made a short movie about the Quran a few years ago called Fitna, and the Dutch military troops in Afghanistan were threatened. Dutch products in Jordania and the rest of the Arab world were boycotted. Ambassadors came and complained to the Dutch government. All those things happened. Why? Because I criticize Islam, and I'm not the only one.
Boycott and complaint at the embassy level is simply diplomacy.
Well, it was unfortunately more than diplomacy if you threaten Dutch troops and if you try to kill people. This is more
that part
than
is more than diplomacy.
That is, and if I got a fatwa and other things. This has nothing to do with diplomacy. But it's not only me. If you remember the cartoonists from Scandinavia. There were several of them that were harassed and almost killed by Islamists. Even a few weeks ago, a journalist from Denmark, Lars Hedegaard, maybe it was also in the news, probably in Australia, was almost slaughtered in his own house by a radical Muslim. Why? He didn't break any law because he was critical about Islam. So my point exactly that Islam and freedom is incompatible is proved by this point.
Although it is partially disproved by the point as well. Some threaten your life. Others choose to go down the road of boycott. Others choose to simply protest. Others may make diplomatic representations to the Dutch embassy.
That's fair.
So it demonstrates that there is a plurality of approaches within that Muslim world. But that does get us to your general thesis that Islam itself is antithetical to the liberal democratic way of life that we all cherish and that we all wish to preserve. But when you look around the world, you have different types of Islamic societies, from the very fundamentalist, such as the Sudan, Saudi Arabia, parts of Afghanistan, parts of Pakistan, to the quite moderate and democratic, essentially Indonesia, Malaysia, for the most part Turkey, Morocco, and certainly most Muslims living in Western democracies are very moderate. So how is it that we can put all Muslim people, as you do, under the banner of their faith, in the one boat?
No, you must have misunderstood what I've said, because I never did that. I never put all Muslims in one boat. Never in my life I did that. I make a distinction between the ideology and the people. And I know that there are moderate Muslims. As a matter of fact, I always said, even here in Australia, that the majority of the Muslims, both in Europe and in my own country and in Australia, are moderate, law-abiding people. People are interested in their day-to-day life, the education of their children. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is a difference between the people and the ideology. And the ideology of Islam is something that cannot be changed. Islam and the Quran is the word of Allah. There will never be even though there are many moderate Muslims. There will never be a moderate Islam. Islam wants to dominate. As a matter of fact, that is what the word Islam means. Islam wants to dominate, wants to subjugate, and anything that is not Islamic, whether you are a Christian, whether you are gay, whether you are an atheist, will pay a very high price. And what is the best example? That Islam has nothing to do with freedom, that unlike other religions, you are not allowed to leave Islam. People all over the world, not only in the Arab world, who dare to say, I don't want to be a Muslim anymore, they are threatened by death. And this is a symbol of totalitarianism.
Your refusal to separate the religion, or as you say, ideology of Islam, from the practice of Islam
no,
is quite disingenuous.
No.
You, for example, say...
I'm not doing that. Look at
Mr.
Surah
Williams, can I finish the question?
Sure.
You say, for example, that you are only interested in attacking the ideology of Islam. Now, at the same time, you say that you want to protect the Judeo-Christian ideology on which Western democracy is based. So we're admitting there's an ideology involved in Judeo-Christianity as well.
No.
In that ideology, the Bible says, now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you have received, let him be accursed. Whoever would not seek the Lord, the God of Israel, should be put to death, whether young or old, man or woman. If your brother entices you away, you shall kill him. That's the ideology of Judeo-Christianity. Now, you're happy to separate the practice in the West from the ideology, but not in the case of Muslims.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate that you are very misinformed again. I don't blame you for not having all the knowledge, but you know, this is the Old Testament.
Correct.
The Old
Judeo-Christian is the word you use.
The Old Testament, as you knew, what came after the Old Testament came the New Testament. This
so
is
Christianity, not Judaism.
There was not a new Quran, and there will never be a new Quran. Second, and maybe most important, this is, if you look at the context, unlike the Bible, unlike the Old Testament, unlike the New Testament, Muslims believe that the Quran is the word of God. Cannot be. Maybe I may finish.
Catholic.
Maybe I may
I grew up
finish now.
Catholic.
Me too. Maybe I can.
And Catholics are taught that the words of the Old Testament are the words of God.
No, they
should believe them.
They are giving to God. They are giving from God to the people. But the Muslims are the only ones who believe that the Quran is the word of God and cannot be criticized. This is number two. Number three.
Have you been to a Christian service where they hold up the Bible and say, this is the word of the Lord?
Certainly.
So how does that differ from what you're describing in Islam?
Besides the differences I just mentioned to you.
But they aren't differences.
Muslims believe it's the word of God.
Secondly, how are they
there
different?
is no one place in the world today where, for instance, if you look at stoning, if you look at the killing of apostates, if you look at how to treat Christians, nowhere it is happening besides in the Arab and the Islamic world. So the best proof is in the eating of the pudding, is that if you look, for instance, at stoning, which is part in the Old Testament and which is part in the Quran, what is happening? Tell me one country where Christianity is dominant, where women or adulterers are stoned. You will not find it anywhere in the world. Where you will find Islamic countries today in the year 2013 where people's hands are cut off,
For sure.
where people are adulterous.
I totally
where
agree.
Still today in our free societies, where people who disagree with Islam, who want to leave Islam, are generally mutilated, there are honor killings. All of those things are happening in our free societies, and I say enough is enough. We are not Islamic countries. We should not act on that, and we should stop the immigration from those barbaric systems.
We will get to those barbaric acts in a moment. And I think anyone who lives in a Western democracy, under principles of a Western democracy, would agree that what we call honor killings, wife killings, etc., genital mutilation, or some of the things that you have associated with Islam, are indeed... Excuse me. That have been associated with Islam in the Western press are barbaric. But we will get to those in a second. You say that nowhere in the world is there a Christian society that enacts the strictures of the Old Testament, which forbid homosexuality, which forbid a woman taking a rightful place in society, which call for apostates to be killed, as we have just seen. But there are many countries that are Muslim countries that don't call for that either. Some do, some don't. So that would tend to demonstrate that it's not Islam itself that is the problem, but the indigenous culture of certain societies that has grown up with a kind of patriarchy and a chauvinism and a massive parochialism. If Islam can differ within itself, how can Islam itself be the problem? I mean, just as Christianity differs in the south of the United States, there have been people killed, not put to death in a public square, but killed in essentially terrorist attacks for their attacks on Christianity.
Yeah. Well, once again, I don't want to be impolite on any question you ask me, but there is only one Quran. There are no two Qurans. There is only one Islam. I traveled myself through almost every Islamic and Arab country. I was in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Iraq. Before I came into trouble and security problems, I traveled everywhere. And of course, I saw differences. You have an Iranian Shiite regime, and you have, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, a Sunni Wahhabistic regime.
Yes.
And the one might be a little bit worse than the other, but they have one thing in common. They are, all those societies where Islam is dominant, they are non-free. The people
Malaysia,
are afraid.
Indonesia,
they are, Indonesia
Turkey,
is not
Morocco.
Turkey. Have you ever seen, sir? Turkey is very close to my country. I mean, it's maybe 2-3 hour fly there. I was there a few times. There were many reports even in the European Parliament. How Turkey is treated, minorities, such as, for instance, Christian, is very bad. And the same goes for Indonesia. Everybody's saying that any country like Indonesia and Turkey are so much democracy. They are not. And even if they were, all the other countries where Islam is dominant are unfree. If you are a critical journalist, I visited journalists in Iran who had to close down their office and threatened by court. Why? Because they were critical to the regime. And it's all over the free world, all over the non-free world in the Islamic world.
But the Iranian regime does not represent Islam.
But it is. I saw it.
And people have protested
I saw it in Syria.
Against the regime.
Have you yourself ever been in the Middle East? I've seen it.
Yes, I have, Mr.
I've seen
Vilters,
it in Syria. I've seen it in Jordan. I've seen it in Egypt. I've seen it in Tunisia. Anywhere of those countries, people are not free. Look at the so-called Arab Spring. The Arab Spring proved to be a bitter Arab winter, where the one other regime is replaced by an even worse regime. And as long as Islam stays dominant there will be no democracy.
But what they were protesting against was not an Ayatollah in Egypt. It was a Western implanted despot, Mr. Mubarak. They were protesting for freedom.
Listen, in Egypt.
And by the way, to say that Indonesia or Malaysia are not democracies would be highly insulting to the viewers from those countries.
So let them be insulted. I don't care. Listen, in Egypt,
that's the point.
The Pew Society. Pew Society. It was a bureau that makes polls in America, very respected. They made a poll not so long ago in Egypt, and they asked people, "Do you want democracy?" And indeed, 62% of the people of Egypt said, yes, we want democracy.
And they are Muslims, most of them.
And they were Muslims, 62%.
But Islam is a non-democratic theology, so how can that be?
Yes.
That 62% of them want democracy?
Okay. Maybe if I can finish, then you can be smart. After that, they had a second question. They said, okay, 62% of you want democracy in an Arab country like Egypt. What do you think about apostasy, people who leave Islam? And the same people, 88% of them said that they should be killed. And this is exactly my point. In a country of Egypt, where people say they want democracy, at the same time they want Sharia law to be implemented after the area of Mubarak, and almost everybody wants people who leave Islam to be slaughtered and to be killed. This is Islam. This is the so-called Arab winter today. And my point is that this kind of culture that is based on violence, on totalitarianism, that we should not import it to our free society. I'm not saying it would be ridiculous to state that any Muslim is extreme. I acknowledge the fact that majority is not, but we should stop importing Islam to our free society. Stop the building of new mosques, shut down all Islamic schools, and let them assimilate in our society like the Dutchmen, the 300,000 Dutchmen that immigrated to Australia in the last decades did as well.
In Australia anyway, and probably in most Western democracies, although you can speak for Holland, most Muslims who live in a Western society are very moderate people. Like most Christians, they divorce the practice of their everyday life to an extent from the most extreme aspects of their religion. Every psychologist in the world will tell you that the simplest way to radicalize a person is to alienate them or marginalize them. So why choose, just from a practical point of view, to stigmatize Islam itself and risk losing the support of moderate people rather than working with those people, many of whom are just as concerned about some of the extreme practices associated with Islam as you are and want to reform them? Why not work with them?
Yes. Listen, I come from reality. The reality in Europe is, whether you like it or not, you should visit us soon, different than here. We have not 2% of the inhabitants from Muslim background, but more than 6%. We have major cities from Malmö in Sweden to Paris in France, to Berlin in Germany, London in United Kingdom, Amsterdam, where there are cities within the cities. Cities that are governments within the governments, cities ruled by the Islam and by the Quran. We have Sharia mortgages, we have Sharia banks, we have even in the United Kingdom today, I don't know if you're aware of it, Sharia courts where there are today valid verdicts from Sharia courts, and then the man gets twice
that they don't conflict with local law.
No, it's not true. When it comes to penal code, yes, but not to know. There are verdicts that a woman inherited half of a man. This is today happening in Europe. You may not like it because it's not, you don't like it within your own ideas, but it's happening today.
But
if you look at crime, maybe I may finish now. You asked me a question.
I know.
If you look in Holland today.
But you're telling me a lie.
No, I'm telling you the truth. If you look at Holland today, you see that, for instance, the Moroccan youth, unlike any other group, between 12 and 24, 65% of them are arrested at a young age. They are making the most crimes. They are beating up gays. They are harassing women. Those things are happening.
Because of their Islam? Because of their Islam?
Almost any of them are from Islamic background.
But is it because they are Muslim that they do that?
It's not because they have a low income, as the hijackers from 9/11 were well-educated people. It's not because of their social background of all this rubbish that people tell us. It's not because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's because they have a culture where they feel dominant, where they want to be dominant, and if you don't wake up, if you will not be vigilant enough, the same will happen here as is happening in so many major cities in Europe.
Here, the Australian Aboriginal youth, the indigenous people of this country, are 28 times more likely to be incarcerated than non-indigenous youths. By the time they're adults, it's 40 times more likely. In America, the prison population is almost 50% black, despite the fact that they only make up 12% of the population. Now, Aboriginal people by and large are not Muslim. Black Americans by and large are not Muslim. So are you blaming those rates of incarceration on Dreamtime theology or Baptist Christianity?
I don't know about Aborigines. I will not talk about anything that I have no knowledge of. But
how can you then categorically say that it's Islam that creates those rates of incarceration?
Because I know that in Europe, once again, whether you like it or not, I don't care. The reality, the facts in Europe today are that we are facing problems that we did not have before the mass immigration from Islamic countries starts. We have problems with the freedom of speech. We have problems with how women are treated, how Christians are treated. We have in all the statistics on crime, we see a big overrepresentation of Muslim youth. Those are the facts. You might not find it politically correct. I don't care. People in Holland, people in Europe, people in Europe care.
It's just that your logic is
the logic is very strong in Holland. It's not faulty at all. People in Holland who are not extreme, who are not racist, who are not extreme, who are not Muslim, are supporting parties of mine. You know why? because journalists like yourself, because politicians that are now forming or now leading parties are shoving it under the party, are under the carpet, are talking multiculturalism, and the people are fed up. That's why parties like mine get 1 million voters. We are the second biggest party in all the polls in the Netherlands today. Why? Not we are bigots, because people like journalists like yourself, but also politicians in Holland, they are not different. As here, on both parties in Australia, they try to ignore it. They try to say, well, it's nonsense. You are a bigot. We sing Kumbaya all day long and think that there are no problems. Sir, there are problems.
Yes,
and
there
by
are problems.
ignoring them,
there are
they
problems.
will not be solved.
Of course there are problems. The fact that you ascribe those problems to the religion of those people is itself a problem. How do you explain? How do you explain that 50% of the American prison population is
I'm not
black?
talking about America. I'm talking about
I know, but
Islam in
can't you
Europe
see
and
that
in
there's a
Australia.
logical leap
No,
there?
I'm not talking about America. What are you talking about? I'm talking about problems we see in Europe
But
today
if you can't see
that we
beyond
did not
Islam
have.
to the other problems that may lead to those facts.
Oh, of course, there are problems with high taxes as well. Maybe you invite me another time. We talk about taxes. I'm not
It must
talking
be
about.
terribly
I'm
difficult
not
for
talking
you
about,
as an
I'm not
MP,
talking
but
about
living
Islam.
tax-free. Yes.
Listen, we have in Europe problems that we did not have before we had an enormous amount of immigrants from Islamic countries. This is a fact, whether you like it or not. And my point this week in Australia is learn from our mistakes. You will find the same problems, you will lose your freedoms, you will get a lot of violence and intolerance if you continue being tolerant to the people and the ideology that are intolerant to you. Start being intolerant to the intolerant and keep being tolerant to the people who are intolerant to you.
Okay, so that's a good point, a good point.
Thank you so much.
Of course, we should be intolerant of those who are intolerant of tolerance.
Exactly.
We understand that.
That's very fair.
But you're
And
saying
that's
that Islam, and by reference to Islam, you are implying that all Islamic people are intolerant.
That's why you're wrong. No, this is ridiculous.
You keep saying that
This
that's
is
wrong, but then you
stupid.
talk about
No,
all the
but,
Moroccan
with
youth
all
in your
respect,
country.
Now you are really being unfair, because you quote me for things that I have not said. I said earlier in this interview even that I make a distinction between the ideology and the people.
But it's a disingenuous distinction.
I never said it's not disingenuous.
It is.
Come on, be
it
fair.
is a disingenuous.
It's not like that.
You say,
and what I'm saying about the people.
You don't separate yourself from your Judeo-Christian ideology.
What I'm saying,
so why do you separate Muslims from their ideology?
What I'm saying about the people is very fair and very simple, and everybody understands.
Just to say it's fair doesn't make it fair.
If you let me finish, even you might make it fair as a liberal person. Listen, if you are an immigrant, for instance, from an Islamic country in our free society, and if you adhere to our values, to our constitution, to our laws, you are equal as anybody else, and you are welcome to stay. But if you cross this red line, if you start acting according to, for instance, Sharia law, if you start committing crimes, then I believe that we should send you packing immediately back away from the country where you came from.
There are 2 points
This is
there.
the things that we should do. This is what we lacked doing in Europe. Now we start very slowly doing it. So behave according to our constitution, our free Western constitution and democracy. You are welcome to stay. If you don't, we send you packing. This is what should happen. This is what we should do.
There are 2 points there. The first point is about transgressions against the law. Now, you are painting a picture of a Muslim society that is rife with disrespectful and in fact violent behaviours towards women and non-Muslims.
Read the Quran.
But Mr. Wilders,
you haven't read the Quran, it's obvious.
You haven't read the Bible, it's obvious.
No, but
in the Bible,
make a joke back, but have you read the Quran, sir? May I ask you?
I have read excerpts of the Quran, sir.
Excerpts.
Yes.
Well,
but have you read the Bible?
Maybe
have you read the Bible,
maybe
Mr.
the rest
Wilders?
of the Sunday I can ask you to read the Quran. You would be shocked.
Have you read the crime statistics in Australia? 1 in 4 women in Australia will be subject to a violent assault by a man in her life. 1 in 4.
Yeah.
Yet only 2% of us
only
2% of us are Muslim.
Yeah.
So why, when a Muslim is violent towards his wife, do we start talking about honour killings and deportation?
No. I mean,
when any other
somebody
citizen is violent towards his wife, we simply let the laws of the land apply.
it should be punished as well. I fully agree. Anybody.
But you're saying that the Muslims should be deported.
Anybody, no, not Muslims. I never said Muslims. Please,
you just
look
did.
back. No, I'm talking about people, Islamic immigrants. I'm talking about people who came, for instance, if
and
you
who now have Dutch citizenship.
So we should strip them from the Dutch citizenship and send them away. We already have a law in Holland that if you are a terrorist, and unfortunately, unlike Australia, we had terrorists killing people in the broad daylight in Amsterdam. My fellow countrymen, you can laugh about it, it's not funny. Theo
I'm not laughing about it, Mr.
was killed in the streets of Amsterdam by a radical Muslim. And we have a law already in Holland that says that terrorists can be stripped of the Dutch nationality and sent away. And what I'm saying is that we should broaden that already existing law. I believe that not only for terrorists, but for all people who make serious crimes, who indeed commit crimes like honor killings, but anything else as well, that they should be stripped of the Dutch nationality.
So any other Dutch national will not be stripped of his nationality if he murders his wife?
No, but any Swedish person or any Australian person should also be stripped of their nationality. It's based on nationality. But the problem is...
But you only talk about it in regards to Muslims in your speeches.
Listen, why? Let me answer that question. It's a fair question. Why? Because we have no problems with Swedish, Australian or Canadian criminals in Holland, and we have problems with Moroccan criminals in Holland. That's why I don't talk about it.
So,
but the law goes for everybody.
And so, just finally, because I know we have to wrap up, on that
I'm just
point,
having fun.
On that point, do you believe it is better to deport someone than to allow Dutch justice to take its role with that person? Don't you believe that the state is abrogating its responsibility as a state not to exercise its authority over its own citizens?
No, of course we should do that. So what I say, once again, we already have this system for terrorists. So it's not new. The principle that you can denaturalize people and send them away is already the Dutch law today. I'm always advocating that we should broaden it.
I understand.
And if we broaden it also to other criminals, of course they are extradited after they have had their jail sentence.
Okay.
So it's, of course we have the rule of law in Holland. For any citizen it's equal, but we are saying that after their imprisonment, if they commit a crime, we should denaturalize them and send them out of the country. This is very normal, and it gives also an incentive for people to behave according to our values, to our laws, equal as anybody else. But if they act according to Sharia, and unfortunately in Europe, Sharia is not an incident, it is happening a lot, then there is no place for you in our societies. It's a very clear message, and I believe it's a very fair message as well.
Certainly the incentive to behave is the jail sentence itself. Like every other citizen has a disincentive to act wrongly because there is a punishment if you do.
Yeah, but to be able, not to be able to stay in a country like the Netherlands, if you're coming from Morocco, is an incentive that might be 1,000,000 times higher even.
Very quickly, our closest neighbour is Indonesia, world's largest Muslim country, world's largest Muslim democracy. Our future economic prosperity is very closely tied to Indonesia. What do you see as the hope for our relationship and our economic prosperity if we were to institute the kinds of laws around, for example, deportation that you're talking about?
Once again, I'm only talking about deportation for criminals, not for anybody who is behaving according to our law. It's about
You
criminals.
also talk about, banning the Quran, though.
Yeah, because in Holland we have banned Mein Kampf. You have to see that in the Dutch context. The Dutch law has banned Mein Kampf. So my point was, especially to socialists in my parliament, that hey, now you are so happy and you applauded the banning of Mein Kampf.
Yep.
Here we have a book that has even more anti-Semitism. The Quran has more anti-Semitism as Mein Kampf. If you are consistent, you should outlaw that book as well. Unfortunately, of course, they were silent. They were not consistent. And they like to have Mein Kampf outlawed, but not the Quran. It was not me. It was the Social Democrats in my parliament.
As far as I know, Muslims haven't killed 6 million Jews in Europe. Will you also be asking for the Old Testament to be banned?
No, of course not. Because, well, we spoke before about all the differences between Christianity and Judaism.
Which on paper are remarkably similar. If you
well, I can repeat everything I said, but once again, it is not to be compared. We are a country and a society, and I think we have that in common with Australia, that is based on Christianity and humanism and Judaism, and what we never should become is a country based on values from Islam. Believe me, your children and grandchildren would not be free people and citizens anymore.
Okay, well, I hope that neither of my children is gay, that's for sure, because the Old Testament tells me that if a man has sex with another man, you should kill them both.
Yes. Can you tell me once again, can you show me one country in the world where gays are killed by Christians? Or shall I tell you? Or shall I tell you?
Bastion in Sydney all the time, and
shall I tell you all those countries in the world, Islamic countries, where gays are hanged and gays are killed, and gays have the most terrible time ever.
Oh yes,
I mean,
of course,
Islam,
but I'm just talking about the book at this point.
Yeah.
So we're going to ban the Old Testament along with the Quran, because it says the same thing as the Quran.
Once again, Muslims believe it's the word of God. It's a word that cannot be interpreted in a different way. That is why they have to act. Fortunately, the majority of the Muslims don't act according to the Islam. At least this is a benefit that we still have, and that's the difference between, for instance, Christians and Muslims. Once again, I'm not talking, my problem is not with the people, with the Muslims. I have a problem with the Islamic fascist ideology, and I promise you that if you are not stopping it to come to Australia, in 10 years' time you will be as bad off as Europe is today. Go and visit all those cities in Europe today, from Amsterdam to London, where you will see that there is a state within a state, and that it's a state that is based on the Quran, on the Sharia law, and that is something you should not import from anywhere.
Having visited London often, I can't accept that there is a state within a state.
Well,
there is no caliphate in London.
There was not so long ago. Yeah, I can send you the link 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was big news in the United Kingdom, a movie on YouTube, which said that there were Muslim patrols. This is how they called it, the Muslim patrols, who harassed women, who took food from people, who did the most terrible things. I will send it to you.
There are Christian mobs of men up at King's Cross every Friday night harassing women.
Let me show you.
And it's not because they're Christian.
You can laugh.
It's because they're mobs of young men.
You can laugh about it, but it's more ignorance than wisdom. So.
Well, no. I think your failure to see the comparisons between Muslim people and non-Muslim people and their identical behaviours is a lack of wisdom. No. And it's certainly a lack of compassion, or maybe a willful blindness.
Well, I'm not here once again to insult you. I'm a guest of your country. But I tell you, if people in Australia are as ignorant as you are, you will have a very tough time in the future. And my only thing is here that I love Australians. I love Australia. I want Australia to stay a free country. And in order to stay free and a liberal country, you should stop the Islamization of your society. Look in any country where Islam is dominant, nobody, or even in Australia, wants such a society. This is my point only, and whether you deal with it or not, it's up to you and not up to me.
Mr. Wilders, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your time in Australia. You must be very happy with the way that your free speech has gone.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me on your show today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.